Few things in Star Wars are as iconic as the hum of a lightsaber, but behind every duel and clash of these iconic weapons lies a hidden philosophy of combat. Both Jedi and Sith developed forms, techniques, and methods that turn a simple plasma blade into a weapon of peacekeeping and war. So today, we're giving you a definitive guide to lightsaber combat and breaking down every single lightsaber form and technique in Star Wars. Before the widespread use of lightsabers in combat, the Jedi used a variant of energy weapons called Proto-sabers. Unlike regular lightsabers, the archaic blades required the use of an external power pack to generate their blade. This power pack created a more volatile blade because of its outrageously high power output. But thanks to its lengthy connection back to the saber, this weapon was quite cumbersome. The use of proto-sabers for combat proved to be catastrophic in untrained hands, causing accidental limb loss or other casualties. Even just cutting the cord between the saber and power pack would render the tool useless. So, the Jedi decided to create a basic sequence of movements to help develop coordination with their weapons. This, combined with the development of modern lightsaber technology, led to the creation of the 7 classic forms of lightsaber combat, beginning with Form 1, Shii-Cho. Shii-Cho is the only lightsaber form with a defined moveset, whereas all other forms are grounded in a sort of combat philosophy. Shii-Cho, otherwise known as the Determination form or the Way of the Sarlacc, emphasized keeping the blade away from the body. It focuses on the basic movements of attacks and parries, focusing on humanoid subjects. Shii-Cho became the foundation of all other lightsaber forms and was always the most important to learn first. As such, every Jedi received instruction in it. It was their first step into a larger world. To keep practitioners safe and to ensure that the proto-saber connection was not severed, Shii-Cho is characterized through wide, sweeping strokes using only vertical and horizontal planes of movement for both combat and defense. There are 2 different forms of Shii-Cho, the first being the ideal form. This form focuses primarily on the upper body and head as areas of attack and defense. The second form, known as the live combat form, was more functional and made use of both vertical and horizontal combat planes at once, characterized by diagonal strikes and slashes toward the lower torso and legs. Shii-Cho's philosophy is victory without injury, and uses the mark of contact known as the Sun Djem, or a disarming slash toward an opponent's weapon. For younglings, training in the first combat form, a classic mark of contact used was shim, which was to create a superficial wound on your target, causing them to drop their weapon or experience numbness in their limbs. This form requires its users to be patient, like a sarlacc waiting for its meal, which is how it got its namesake. Some masters of the Determination form include Jedi Master Kip Fisto and the Exile Mitra Surik. The former was considered an advanced Form 1 practitioner during the Clone Wars, able to get the best out of notorious Jedi killer General Grievous with his mastery of Shii-Cho. Quick break because this is huge. Our friends at Saber Council are giving away over $1,500 in lightsabers and gift cards. And it's completely free to enter. The top prize is an Anakin Episode 3 Profi Saber, one of the most advanced replicas you can own. Second place gets a Luke Episode 6 Neopixel, and third wins a Darksaber SE. But that's not all. They're also giving away 3 RGB Initiate Dueling Sabers and 4 $50 gift cards just in time for Black Friday. All you have to do is click the link in the description and complete as many actions as you can. Things like following them on social media or signing up for their email list. Each one gives you more entries, so the more you do, the better your chances of winning. It's free, it takes less than a minute, and the prizes are seriously worth it. So hit that link below, enter now, and may the Force be with you. Form 2, Makashi, addressed the shortcomings of Form 1. While many might attribute the second lightsaber form to a darker method of combat, thanks to its use by several notable Sith, its development was actually rooted in the light side of the Force. During conflicts with the Sith and Jedi, both sides found each other to be using the first form of lightsaber combat, Shii-Cho. So, Makashi was made as a direct counter for the first combat form. Called the contention form or the way of the Salamiri, the core tenet of Makashi is an emphasis on balance. To perfect your use of the second form of combat, you must be in balance both mentally and physically. If you are unable to be in balance, your form gets thrown off, and it puts you at risk. Since the core tenet of Form 2 is balance, its combat philosophy relies on dismantling your opponent. If your opponent remains off balance while you maintain your own equilibrium, it puts you at an advantage for the duel. Makashi was made to pick apart the weaknesses of the first lightsaber form, but its combat philosophy remains relevant even against other forms and techniques of combat. While Shii-Cho is the only form with a set move list, Makashi is incredibly recognizable in practice. Practitioners move in a very linear fashion, moving in a 180-degree path and preferring to meet their opponents head-on rather than moving around them. Noted by its highly recognizable opening salute, Makashi is a one-handed style of combat, though not exclusively, as we see many users divert to using two hands when required. Since Makashi primarily uses one hand, when facing physically stronger opponents, practitioners of the second lightsaber form might prefer to divert their opponent's attacks to the side by parrying and then immediately bringing their saber back to riposte. Users of Form 2 never let a fight drag on, preferring to end a bout as soon as possible after it begins. Their chosen method to end a duel is through a mark of contact known as the Shiak, which is a forward-piercing strike through the chest or torso of the opponent. Makashi is used almost exclusively in lightsaber-to-lightsaber combat, as that is where this form excels. It should also be noted that Makashi should be used in single combat rather than against multiple opponents. If one faces multiple threats, it's always best to try and position yourself in a way where you can fight one opponent at a time rather than being forced to fight them all simultaneously. This is because users of this lightsaber form are taught to focus on one thing at a time, typically the blade or body of their adversary. This is why it's difficult to employ Form 2 when deflecting blaster bolts. There are too many things to focus on one at a time. That is why when you see Count Dooku deflecting blaster bolts, he almost swats them away as if they were darts or daggers. Other Jedi and Sith prefer to simply angle their blade rather than strike through a blaster bolt. One of the most prolific users of Makashi, Count Dooku emphasized that overt specialization in just one of the classic lightsaber forms far outweighed a general understanding of all other forms of combat. Whereas other Jedi had knowledge of all other aspects of saber combat, Dooku exclusively used Form 2. This dueling mastery meant that he could not engage multiple Jedi at once, but being the master that he is, Dooku can force multiple opponents into awkward situations so he can pick them apart one by one. This is clearly evident in his duel against Obi-Wan and Anakin on Obadiah, where he forces Anakin, an attack specialist, on the defensive, and Obi-Wan, the defensive specialist, on the offensive. It's also why he often makes a point of incapacitating one of the Jedi while focusing on the other. Some well-known practitioners of lightsaber Form 2 include, as mentioned, Count Dooku, who was regarded as its most adept practitioner during the Clone Wars, as well as Shakti, the Grand Inquisitor, and perhaps one of the greatest duelists of all time, Tulak Horde. Form 3, Soresu, is less of a combat form and more of a defensive form. As a matter of fact, that's all the third combat form utilizes in combat. When Jedi found that their forms of combat were being deconstructed and broken down by the Sith using Makashi, they decided they needed to up their game when it came to defense, and that they did. Called the Way of the Mynock, or the Resilience form, Soresu's core philosophy was based on the conservation of energy in combat. Using this form, you seek to outlast your opponents through will and defensive power with no offense. This form was developed at a time when blasters became a more common occurrence, and when lightsaber forms became more tailored to the weapon, since it was around this time that proto-sabers were being phased out in favor of newer lightsaber technology to defend against the new mobility and agility used in lightsaber combat as proto-sabers became redundant, and to defend users from waves of blaster fire. Soresu became a valuable tool in a Jedi and Sith's arsenal. Form 3 focused on deflection, whether that be deflecting oncoming lightsaber attacks or deflecting blaster bolts, taking over one of the chief failings of Form 2. To conserve their energy during combat, practitioners of Form 3 tended to block lighter attacks directly, clashing and connecting lightsaber blades if needed. When it came to heavier attacks, however, or against a stronger opponent, they would often attempt to ward away those attacks, stepping to the side or gently guiding their opponent's attack away from the user. Also, unlike Makashi, Soresu can be used against multiple opponents and often favors that tactic. When in an enlightened stage while using Form 3, users of this lightsaber form can perceive enemy positions and the locations of enemy projectiles in the future, a kind of precognition. This technique can also evolve into what's called a circle of shelter, using a precognitive state to deflect any incoming attack in rapid succession. Often, those viewed in this state are said to look as though they're encapsulated in a sphere of light from their weapon. Once the Soresu user notices their opponent tiring or slowing down, they may choose to press their offensive or continue to wait for an opening. When that opening presents itself, they will attempt to strike and finish the battle in any way they deem necessary. Just like the second form of lightsaber combat, Lightsaber Form 3 also has an opening salute, and one I'm sure you're familiar with. This involves pointing the tip of your saber at the opponent, holding it above your head, while also having your hand extended or pointing at them. This salute can be seen through almost all of this form's users, including Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was regarded as the form's true master. His proficiency with Soresu allowed him to defeat opponents who relied on multiple blades or a relentless offense, such as Darth Maul, General Grievous, and even Anakin Skywalker. Outside of Obi-Wan, other notable Form 3 users include Luminara Unduli, Kanan Jarrus, Depa Billaba, and Darth Zana. Form 4, Ataru, is a lightsaber form that focuses on speed and the augmentation of one's own physical skill. Otherwise known as the Aggression form or Way of the Hawkbat, the fourth form of lightsaber combat can best be identified through the acrobatics typically employed by its users. This lightsaber form is the first that we'll look at that practitioners use both within and outside of combat. While most people only see Ataru as a combat form that uses dramatic aerial attacks and fancy acrobatics, that's only part of the story. Most Jedi who use the Ataru lightsaber form are using it to either enhance themselves or likewise to compensate for something they lack. For example, Jedi Grandmaster Yoda uses the aggression form to compensate for his lack of height, spinning circles around his opponents and meeting them at various heights to confuse and overwhelm them. Qui-Gon Jinn uses the Ataru form throughout his career as a Jedi, but in later years, the form helped him in overcoming his aging body. Others, like Quinlan Vos, can employ the philosophy of this form to enhance their senses, adding to their already incredible tracking abilities. Ataru helped both Jedi and Sith effectively be the best versions of themselves. it was also often that younger Jedi who may not have more energy or wanted to make more use of their youthful state would use Ataru as well. Since Obi-Wan's master was Qui-Gon, Ataru was one of the many lightsaber forms he specialized in before primarily focusing on Soresu. Likewise, Anakin Skywalker favored this lightsaber form before turning to the fifth form of lightsaber combat. The opening stance of Ataru is also quite distinguishable, even if it is kinda subtle. Unlike Forms 2 and 3, Form 4 of lightsaber combat does not have a fancy opening salute. Rather, all practitioners who use this form would hold their lightsaber tight to their body, running parallel to their torso and holding the blade on their dominant side, typically close to their head. As mentioned, some of the most widely known users of the fourth combat form include Jedi Master Yoda, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Quinlan Vos. Form 5, Shien and Djem. Well, both of these titles, Shien and Djem, are the fundamental variations of Form 5. They are in and of themselves two distinct lightsaber forms. Also known as the Perseverance form or the Way of the Krayt Dragon, this lightsaber form had two philosophies, each distinct to either variant of Form 5 one chooses to use. Those who practice Form 4 tend to focus their Force energy in enhancing their agility and acrobatics, but those who practice Form 5 focus the Force to enhance their physical strength. It's most often the case that individuals who practice Shien and Djem are already larger, typically physically strong, tall, or both. However, while other Jedi were suggested to pursue other lightsaber forms if they didn't fit that description, some Jedi did not. A famous example is Ahsoka Tano. While Ahsoka employed Form 4 in most of her combat, using the Force to enhance her already naturally acrobatic skill, her master, Anakin Skywalker, was a master of the 5th combat form and taught his apprentice to adopt it as well. While Ahsoka was not nearly as physically strong as Anakin, she did something that not many other Jedi did, which gave her an advantage at learning this particular form: adopting a reverse lightsaber grip. This helped give Ahsoka an extra punch in her strikes against lightsaber to lightsaber combat, but we'll go over the specific details of that later in this video. Shien is the defensive format of the 5th lightsaber form, and its primary technique, known as Barrier of Blades, might be something you recognize from Form 3, which indeed it was adapted from. This lightsaber form came into existence through the efforts of Jedi Masters who believed the 3rd form of combat did not allow sufficient opportunities for counterattack, which, indeed, it did not. So instead, using the building blocks of Form 3, they created a lightsaber form that focused not on deflecting, but on reflecting opponents' attacks, specifically blaster bolts. When practitioners of the 3rd form of combat avoided blaster bolts, they just deflect them any which way to ensure their absolute safety. However, users of Shien focus on reflecting blaster bolts at their opponents, making it ricochet in any direction required for maximum damage. The best analogy we can give is thinking of a lightsaber as a kind of mirror. Simply by adjusting the angle at which a lightsaber meets an incoming blaster bolt can determine the direction at which that bolt travels. Pointing the tip of the blade toward an opponent tends to reflect it back in that direction, whereas tilting the blade otherwise will have it deflect in other uncontrolled directions. The Djem technique follows the philosophy of turning an enemy's attack back on them, but is optimized for lightsaber to lightsaber combat rather than blasters. Users of Djem are masters of the fluid riposte, where one deflects a forceful enemy attack and immediately counterattacks, though the emphasis of this form still lies in strength. To spot a Djem user, you'd typically be looking at violent blows or strong overhead strikes where individuals attempt to abolish the defense of their opponent. whereas Makashi seeks workarounds to opponents' defensive abilities and looks to dismantle it through throwing their opponent off balance. Djem users seek to blow straight through their adversary. Think of Djem like a freight train. Almost no matter how you try to divert that train from coming, even if you try to change tracks and it approaches too fast or too strongly, it can still crash straight through you. And as it happened, that's exactly how Anakin Skywalker defeated Count Dooku on the Invisible Hand. Some well-known Form 5 users include Anakin Skywalker, Plo Koon, Ahsoka Tano, and Darth Vader. However, the variation of Form 5 used by Vader is very different from that of Anakin Skywalker, hence why we separated them. Vader's bulky and heavy suit does not allow for nearly any percentage of the flexibility and mobility Anakin had. So, while Anakin's variation of Djem focused on using more whole-body movements to increase the strength of his strikes, Vader's movements are made exclusively by his arms, deciding not to use much body movement at all. Form 6, Niman, can best be described as the blank slate form, as that is effectively its entire mantra. The moderation form, or the Way of the Rancor, takes aspects of every one of the previous 5 lightsaber forms and melds them together, along with each of their combat philosophies in just one form. Essentially, a Form 6 user was a jack of all trades but a master of none. Niman balanced out each other form and resulted in a unique fighting style for each practitioner that used it. It covered all of the basic movements of the other forms, creating a fighting style that didn't necessarily have a specific advantage. However, it also lacked any drawbacks that are present in any of the other forms. The 6th form of lightsaber combat was different for each person who used it, taking different aspects of each form to create their own unique fluid form of combat. It's often the case that individuals with unique lightsabers or preferences in their combat style focus on using Niman as their preferred form, or at the very least a starting ground to perfect their technique in other forms. This included individuals who specialized with using a double-bladed lightsaber. For example, Exar Kun was a specialist in the 6th lightsaber form. Even Darth Maul specialized in Niman, getting used to using his double-bladed lightsaber before specializing in the 7th form of lightsaber combat. Other individuals who use 2 lightsabers at the same time, a technique we'll talk about shortly, will often default to Niman when engaging in combat against others. Niman also allows for more unorthodox methods used during combat, aside from differences in lightsaber design. This would allow users to engage in telekinetic practices while in combat, a technique used in other forms, but quite often in Niman. One of the top practitioners of the Common Era of Star Wars was the Jedi Battle Master during the Clone Wars, Sin Drailig. While in his role as the Jedi Battle Master, he also acted as the head of security for the Jedi. This meant he also had a hand in training the Jedi Temple Guards, all of whom use unique double-bladed lightsaber variants, prerequisites that would lead us to assume that most of, if not all of them, also practice the 6th lightsaber form. This list also includes Exar Kun and Darth Maul, as mentioned earlier. Form 7, Juyo, and Vaapad. In a similar fashion to Form 5 of lightsaber combat, the 7th form also has 2 different variations within it. However, both variations fall under the category of the Ferocity form or the Way of the Vornsker. The first variation is called Juyo, and is the most aggressive and unpredictable form of lightsaber combat. It required tapping into one's raw emotions, and was seen as a form that would draw people dangerously close to the dark side. Therefore, it was a form seldom taught among the Jedi, save for a special few. Juyo was the baseline of the 7th form of lightsaber combat, and its main tenet was to surrender yourself completely to the will of the Force. This makes the movements of the individual unpredictable and incredibly violent. For this reason, it would seem that individuals who practice the 7th lightsaber form do not follow traditional rules of combat, something that was highlighted by certain Jedi when fighting Chimere in The Acolyte. Juyo was the most voracious lightsaber form and was both erratic and chaotic, focusing heavily on attack. Dipping into one's emotions helped strengthen the form, giving even more power to Sith users who practiced it, but drew a blurry line for any Jedi practitioners. Because of that, the Jedi labeled Form 7 as forbidden for all except for a numbered few. Darth Sidious had even gone as far as labeling it the Sith form, which is something that certainly holds, considering how many Sith use Juyo. Mace Windu and fellow Jedi Master Sora Bulk studied Juyo and modified it into a new variant they labeled as Vaapad, after a predator on Serapin whose strikes were lightning fast and overwhelming. But learning this form was still incredibly dangerous to practice, not physically, but mentally. While learning the 7th form, Vaapad's emphasis on enjoying combat led the co-founder of the form, Sora Bulk, to fall to the dark side. While he was already fascinated with the dark side of the Force, Bulk dove deeper into this fascination when practicing Vaapad alone. Unlike Juyo, the Vaapad variant of Form 7 had a philosophical difference. Using this variant, practitioners created a channel where they could redirect an opponent's emotions and darkness without succumbing to it themselves. Juyo was raw chaos, while Vaapad was a more controlled chaos, forcing an individual to balance on the knife's edge of the dark side. One could control their own inner dark side, and rather than surrendering to the storm of the Force, found a path through it, focused on control. Direct permission from Mace Windu himself, being the master of the form, was required to learn the form as a Jedi. The different philosophies of this form had their advantages and disadvantages, depending on the user's perspective, but those who mastered the 7th lightsaber form were considered to be some of the best duelists in the galaxy, able to eviscerate their opponents with ease. Some of the most well-known users of Vaapad included Mace Windu, Sora Bulk, and Depa Billaba, while well-known users of Juyo include Darth Maul, Darth Sidious, and many more. The traditional 7 forms of lightsaber combat have stood the test of time for a millennia, but after Order 66, the Jedi Order crumbled, leaving nobody to practice these ancient forms. This gave way for a young upstart by the name of Luke Skywalker and his new Jedi Order to practice a brand new set of lightsaber forms. When Luke Skywalker formed his own Jedi Order, he did not have much formal training in any of the traditional 7 lightsaber forms, so he decided to create his own, starting with the medium form. The medium form of combat blends the powers of offense and defense, moving at moderate speed with considerable power and stamina. It was designed above all to be adaptable and unpredictable, based on the philosophy of Lightsaber Form 6, but with more practical applications. The medium format of Luke's saber combat was taught as the default in his order, ensuring every student had a solid foundation to build upon before branching out. This form was versatile, dependable, and sustainable in more lengthy duels. However, it lacked specialization. If someone used the medium style against a master of a more extreme combat form, it could likely be outpaced or overpowered. The fast style of Luke's order focuses one's aggression through speed, attempting to overwhelm the enemy before they can react. If this sounds familiar, that's because this form was based on the traditional 4th form of lightsaber combat, Ataru. This form prioritizes velocity and rapid strikes over raw power, combining Ataru's spirit with the precision of Form 2, Makashi. This form holds a heavy reliance on agility, reflexes, and endurance to maintain pressure on an opponent. Its strength comes from fighting against multiple opponents and dealing with blaster fire, along with facing slower and more heavy-hitting targets. Its biggest strengths are its momentum and initiative, which enable it to adapt in chaotic environments. However, the form may be considered flawed due to the overwhelming dependence on stamina. Its strikes carry less weight, making it less effective against heavily armored opponents or strong defensive duelists. If someone can conserve their energy more than a practitioner of the fast form, they're likely to be worn down quickly. The strong style of combat emphasizes domination through power and spatial control, focusing on strength, leverage, and powerful strikes. Similar to the Djem variant of Form 5, this form was refined by Luke with a sense of restraint. The strong form sacrifices blistering speed, instead for impact and breaking through an enemy's guard. It was most effective against resilient enemies, droids, or in situations where combat needed to be ended as efficiently as possible. Its strength lay in devastating strikes against heavier opponents, but it also had good defense against lightsaber-wielding or blaster-holding opponents. Unfortunately, this form had a slower recovery time thanks to its dedicated strikes, making it vulnerable to faster styles if the user could not predict or keep pace. While there are many lightsaber forms, there are also many techniques and methods that individuals use during combat outside of these practiced forms. These range from separate combat philosophies to how people hold their lightsaber, but we're going to kick it off with Form 0. Form 0 isn't necessarily a traditional lightsaber form. In fact, this form does not use lightsabers at all. The core philosophy of Form 0 is don't draw a lightsaber unless necessary. It was a principle above all followed by many Jedi. The idea behind Form 0 was that a Jedi's most important martial skill was to know when it was appropriate to draw their weapon. Jedi Masters would advertise this as the basis upon which all other forms should build. This form was to teach that Jedi were the keepers of peace, not warriors. To Jedi, those who would continue to learn additional combat expertise without hearkening to Form 0 would continue to gain temptation to rush toward combat rather than seeking a peaceful resolution. Not following Form 0 was considered to be poor technique at best and moral weakness at worst. Form 0's origins date back to the earliest days of the Jedi Order, though it was a principle still supported by Grandmaster Yoda. Jedi were taught to restrain themselves rather than resort to aggressive negotiations. The name Jar-Kai is the formal title given to the dueling technique of using multiple blades at once, typically dual wielding. With that said, it should be noted that Jar-Kai is not a lightsaber form as many seem to misunderstand. Rather, Jar-Kai is used in tandem with many lightsaber forms, but it requires a degree of focus and discipline that many Jedi and Sith seemingly lack. However, those who can wield Jar-Kai effectively were some of the most deadly combatants met on the field of battle. Some well-known practitioners of Jar-Kai include Asajj Ventress, who was a Jar-Kai specialist who practiced Form 2 of traditional lightsaber combat, Ahsoka Tano, who practiced Forms 4 and 5 of lightsaber combat, and Darth Sidious, who practiced Form 7 of lightsaber combat. Trakata is a combat technique that is often considered a form of lightsaber combat and a forbidden one at that. But just like Jar-Kai, Trakata is not a form of combat, rather something used in tandem to the traditional combat forms used by Jedi and Sith. This technique involves turning the blade of a lightsaber on and off during a fight. And within this technique, there are 3 frameworks. Passing the blade, which involves beginning a strike, then deactivating the blade to pass through a block before reactivating it on the other side of the guard. Unbalancing block, a method in which a user deactivates their blade while locked with another, causing their opponent to lose balance. And flash slash, where the saber is only activated for a split second, not allowing for much reaction time. It's considered a forbidden form because it is seen as unfaithful and dishonorable to be used during combat. But certain situations have called for its use, both by Jedi and Sith. It's a dangerous technique because if an individual miscalculates even the slightest amount, it might mean losing a limb or even their life. This technique has been displayed by countless famous individuals, including Cal Kestis, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Chimere, otherwise known as the Stranger. The technique of reverse-gripped lightsaber combat is more or less frowned upon in the world of Star Wars, thanks to it being considered improper. But those who employ this unique tactic help to make strikes stronger for inherently weaker individuals practicing stronger forms. As mentioned earlier, this was a technique used by Ahsoka Tano to help her with mastering the heavy-handed form of Djem So. However, if the reverse-gripped technique is used by someone who is already physically powerful and/or follows an aggressive and powerful lightsaber form, it makes for an incredibly dangerous combatant. Enter Galen Merrick, Starkiller, one of the most ferocious and dominant lightsaber users in the galaxy. Also practicing the fifth form of lightsaber combat, Starkiller utilized the enhanced power of reverse gripping his lightsabers to absolutely shred through his opponents. However, using this technique meant that individuals were primarily focused on attack rather than on defense. If pushed on the defensive by a stronger opponent, the reverse grip made it more difficult to defend one's center. Moreover, if they attempted to block an overwhelmingly strong blow, it could knock the blade of the lightsaber into the user's arm, risking it being severed from their body. Against blaster bolts, the reverse grip technique can be advantageous for redirecting them back at opponents, but when it came to single combat, it's a primarily offensive technique. Sokan was a battlefield technique emphasizing movement and positioning within the environment to gain an advantage. Practitioners of this technique constantly shift their stance and/or location to force their opponent into a disadvantageous position. This could include forcing them uphill, forcing them to face the sun, or positioning them between obstacles. This turned the battlefield into a weapon, making it ideal for defense, retreats, or stalling your opponent until reinforcements could arrive. It required an awareness of one's surroundings and ample space to perform. Sokan loses almost all of its effectiveness in confined or flat arenas such as corridors or starship interiors. While the method of Sokan has a long history, the most famous example of its use might have already come to mind, as it is possibly one of the most iconic scenes in all of Star Wars, when Obi-Wan takes the high ground from Anakin in their duel on Mustafar. Telekinetic combat techniques integrated force powers such as pushes, pulls, and throws seamlessly into lightsaber combat. For many Jedi, they find the Force as part of their arsenal in combat, and indeed, it was. Practitioners would attack with both their blade and the Force, using shoves to break an opponent's guard, only to follow up with a swift slash of their blade. They could hurl massive objects mid-duel or pull an opponent off balance. This could even extend to using techniques like Jar Kai, but through the use of levitating one or all of your own lightsabers, something employed to deadly effect by Darth Traya. This made a Force user incredibly versatile, turning any object into a weapon. It made combat difficult to predict, forcing opponents to guard against both blades and the Force. However, it was incredibly taxing and required utmost concentration and power. Most Jedi were often restrained in their use, mostly due to ethics and the destruction of their surroundings unless in times of great struggle and war. However, the Sith would often weaponize it without any hesitation. Darth Vader was a master of this, combining his brute strength with the Force during his duels, something he passed on to his apprentice, Starkiller. Vader would use this tactic on Bespin against his son, Luke Skywalker, tossing objects from the room they were dueling in at Luke while simultaneously forcing him to use his lightsaber. Dun Mok was something almost always employed by the Sith, effectively as a form of psychological warfare during combat. The entire philosophy of this combat technique was to break an opponent's spirit before attacking their body. This method involved taunting, deception, mind tricks, or exploiting emotional weakness to destabilize one's opponent. Often, done mock is paired with aggressive and overwhelming attacks, so the opponent is both physically and mentally cornered. This technique disrupts the opponent's focus and concentration to the force, able to turn an opponent's emotions against them. This method, however, is useless against opponents who hold a strong mental discipline, like Master Yoda. Also, overconfidence in one's ability to use done mock can backfire if the opponent grows stronger through defiance. If you're looking at one individual who employed done mock to absolute perfection, it was Darth Sidious, masterfully mocking opponents to throw them off balance. A surprising entry to those who use this method also happens to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. His defensive mastery of Soresu allowed him to hold off the offenses of many opponents, whom he would often taunt or quip with during duels. Crisp Zest was a three-dimensional aerial style of combat involving the use of intense acrobatics, flight, and aerial agility. Think of using Lightsaber Form 4, but taking it to an extreme. This method was best suited for Jedi or Sith who had the ability to levitate, fly, or even use jetpacks to extend their movement. This allowed for extreme mobility and unpredictability, able to overwhelm ground-bound opponents with vertical angles of attack. This technique, however, was incredibly stamina draining, especially without any external aids. It was also vulnerable to any long-range force abilities such as force push, pull, and lightning. An interesting entry to those who used Crisp Zest was a Dark Jedi named Maw, who lost his legs in combat and levitated to travel. But that does it for every single lightsaber form and technique in Star Wars. Were there any we missed? Let us know in the comments.